Leonardo Campo. I'm one of the programming coordinators here at Xpace. I've been with the gallery for about 7 years now, 7 long and amazing years. If you're new to Xpace, we are an artist-run center and gallery and resource for emerging artists, designers, curators, writers, you name it. First and foremost, we are in art galleries, which is why this workshop is happening within a beautiful exhibition. We accept all of our programming. We figure out all of our programming through an annual open call for submissions. And our mandate is emerging artists. So we're really looking to give, young artists or artists who have never shown at all before the opportunity to get their footing in terms of a professional setting and, really embarking on this life path of an artist. And so part of that is exhibitions. We also offer free or pay-what-you-can workshops like this. They range from really practical things like, learning how to navigate or rejecting rejection, or tenants' rights workshops, or grant writing, or tax workshops for artists. So they're really practical workshops. But we also have events and things that are more based around a social context, or skill building. So we're really trying to establish a broader network of art that's happening in the city by way of professional opportunities and just providing a space for folks to meet each other. If you aren't already following us on Instagram, I would recommend doing so. We do so much here at Xpace, but we recognize that we can only do so much. Toronto's a big and beautiful city with so much happening. And so daily on our social media, we're always resharing free or pay-what-you-can workshops, job postings in the arts, or other calls for submissions to our stories on the daily, and we update it every single day. So if you're looking for other places to get your work out to, I'd really recommend using that. And lastly, I'll say that the life of an artist can be a bit challenging or precarious or unclear or mysterious if you're not initiated to it. Through my time at Xpace, it's been really gratifying to help artists sort of realize that it doesn't need to be this intimidating, it doesn't need to be this scary, and everything I've done with this space has been in the effort of showing artists that you actually can make a go of it, and here are some practical tools that you can use to advocate for yourself, and really put your best foot forward when it comes to trying to make it happen in one of the most expensive cities in North America. So we really appreciate your time coming here today. Before I pass it off to Jordan, I just want to say I'm also going to be part of this as well, just popping in and out. I might have a comment or two. Jordan and I are super good pals, and so it's really nice to have her here. And not to take a spotlight away from Jordan, but I'll pass it right to you.
And before that, we'll do a quick acknowledgement.
Oh, yes,
we can do it
collaboratively.
collaboratively, which is to say, of course, that we're here on unceded territories, which belongs to Indigenous folks for thousands and thousands of years, including in this particular area.
The Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and Allied Nations.
And Mississaugas of the Credit, which are considered the Cree treaty holders, as well as Métis people. And I want to sort of even start with that because there's many different ways that people consider the relationship that exists between folks who are settlers to this area and folks who are Indigenous. And one of them is the Wampum Belt Covenant, which is one that I think, to me, really creates a clear sense of understanding that there is sort of enough to go around. And so with that, I kind of lead into this workshop, in part because there can be a sense sometimes for folks that many people get many opportunities and some people get no opportunities. And there just can be a real division sometimes, I think, within the arts. And when I first pitched this workshop, it was really around this idea of one of the open call themes, which was somewhere, elsewhere, nowhere, right? If I'm not mistaken. And so it was even thinking about this idea of comparing grass is greener on the other side. All this to say that's kind of what brought us here. So this workshop is Rejecting Rejection. It's navigating experiences of rejection for emerging artists. I'll introduce myself first, and then I'm curious to know just a little bit about who's here in the room. So I'm Jordan King. My pronouns are she or her. I'm a recent graduate of OCAD's Criticism and Curatorial Practice Master's Program. I have an artistic practice myself, which is based in performance and media arts, specifically video. I'm really interested in this interaction between video and performance for camera, live performance on stage, how that's documented by cameras, and really kind of querying that relationship a little bit. And I've also curated exhibitions which have tended to be archival material. I was working at a gallery in Montreal in 2021, and that was curating some more so exhibitions of contemporary artists who had applied to open calls. So I was working with them to present those exhibitions, produce those. And I've had my writing published in Public Journal, which is a Toronto-based publication out of York University, Candy Magazine, which is based out of Spain. And I have some really exciting projects in the works this year. Last year I was a participant in Nuit Blanche, so I'll talk a little bit about that process, because Nuit Blanche is an open call that happens that folks apply to. I did receive a little bit, not a lot, grant support, but I did get a little bit of grant support with that. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then this year I'm artist in residence at Gallery 44. This is sort of like yet officially unannounced, but it is like already in motion. And I'm also artist in residence for a project based out of York University called On Being Ill. The acronym is OBI, and that's a SSHRC funded program. And SSHRC is a federal government agency, which stands for the Social Sciences Humanities Research Council of Canada. And there are some ways that projects get funding for artists through SSHRC. So SSHRC isn't one that we're really going to talk about in this, but if folks get into graduate level of study or they're considering master's programs, you'll definitely hear about SSHRC funding in the arts, although it's an interesting kind of like, interaction, because it is like, it's like a sort of federal government agency. It doesn't really feel very arts related, but they do fund some arts stuff.
Can I
And so the way this is going to go, I'm going to take everybody through some slides talking about broadly the process of both applying for various opportunities, the experiences of rejection that are sort of an inevitability within the arts, and then sort of like what I consider to be sort of like a redirect, and that's sort of like a how to continue going and how to continue applying, and concluding with some concrete sort of examples of places that I look to see what's out there in terms of calls, some that folks might be well aware of, some that folks maybe haven't heard of, some that are free, some that are paid, and we'll just talk a little bit about that, and just the whole process around this continual kind of need to be like looking for more opportunities and like looking for more open calls, and it can feel a bit overwhelming, I think, at times. I'm going to start with this little nugget of tough love. So this is something that I've heard out in the world, and I remember reading it once and sort of thinking like, oh wow, ouch. So the sort of motto was, if you're not getting rejected, you're not trying hard enough. Which is to say that it's so much a part of the process of being an artist and being a creative that you actually almost have to just anticipate it, really. And I'm not necessarily an advocate for like quite that level of tough love to say that like everybody needs to be told this in a way that's maybe condescending. But it is something that I have come back to for myself when I'm thinking about continuing to sort of just need to keep reapplying and actually seeing that rejection process as part of the lifelong growth and development of being an artist, because it actually has the potential to sort of I think shape a little bit just how it is you're focusing your time and your energy. So I'm curious how many folks here have never applied to like a grant or open call before ever. How many folks have applied for like between 5 and 10 in their lifetime? And how many folks would say they've applied for like well more than 20, say? So I think like as emerging artists and creatives, I think that that's like a sort of like healthy place to be. I'll talk about some of my own sort of like numbers and metrics and statistics. I applied for, I think, 30 projects last year, and maybe 30 the year before or something, which admittedly is like very, very, very ambitious. But I was coming up to the conclusion of my program at 𝙍𝙬𝙟𝙚, and I really felt that I wanted to have some things in motion for once my program ended. And I just wanted to feel like I wasn't sort of, once you're like released from grad school or from a formal education program, I think it can feel a bit like, oh my gosh, you're a bit kind of like untethered. And I really didn't want to feel that sense of losing a sort of connection, I guess, to that sort of support. So I was really aggressively applying because I really wanted to have like projects in motion. I wanted to have things that were like, I knew were going to be happening. So there's a whole range of different kinds of opportunities that we're going to cover today, both this sort of more practical side, which includes grants, residencies, exhibition open calls, fellowships. And then there's some that are a little bit more nebulous and a little bit more sort of organic and maybe less formal. And those can be sort of networking opportunities, broader networking opportunities. That includes things like asking to try to set up a meeting with somebody, asking somebody to take a look at your portfolio or to take a look at your website or to get some feedback in that way. And then there's this sort of like just general relationship building kind of stuff that I think has to happen with galleries and curators, and also with press media, which I would encourage folks not to try to rush to sort of that stage yet. But I think it's important for folks to know that that is also a part of building a sort of lifelong artistic career, is that you have relationships with folks who would potentially want to write about the work that you're doing, or who would potentially want to cover it, or who are just, just in kind of supporting your work as you're developing, as you're going along. So this isn't going to really be like a deep dive of grant writing. Xpace does grant writing workshops. The thing that I will say is that I take every single opportunity to attend a grant writing workshop that I can. So anything that the Ontario Arts Council is putting on, if it's on Zoom, I will watch it. Anything that I can attend in person, I will attend. Because even if it's once a year that you're getting to hear someone talk about the way that grants are going to be structured on that year, it can act as a good sort of like a refresher. And I was going to mention, because everybody's feverishly writing, there will be links shared. So I'm going to share a set of links. So I don't want people to feel pressured to like take a whole ton of notes. I hope we can also like just talk through this as we're here in person. But I will share links with folks that'll be made available on the Xpace website, and that'll be shared with everybody who's here attending in person. So the thing about grants is like grants really are, I think you have to really think of them as like a lifelong part of your artistic practice. And one of the things about grants that I think is really important is that grants actually allow you, and they sort of force you a little bit to clarify your thinking around the project, around what it is that you want to do. So, for myself, I have made it right to the finish line with a grant and then not submitted it because I just didn't feel it was quite ready to actually be submitted. But the process of still preparing it and of structuring it in that way, to think through, these are the outcomes, this is the budget, this is how I would do it, even though I didn't actually end up submitting it on that grant cycle, that I think still really has value. And so for folks that are here, I'm also curious, are folks OCAD students that are here? Anybody? A couple of you. So if you're not an OCAD student, but let's say you are a student of another institution, one of the reasons I'm highlighting on here, you'll see the OCAD Center for Emerging Artists and Designers, or the OCAD travel grants, for example, is that like many academic institutions do offer these kinds of sort of smaller grants And then, of course, there's the big three, which is Toronto Arts Council, Ontario Arts Council, Canada Council. And then I included production grants, and production grants can be something helpful to think about as you're starting out creating work. And maybe let's say a Canada Council grant, which is going to be quite lofty and the most amount of work, I think, to put together, in my opinion. Canada Council grants are really like, it's quite a lot, I think, that needs to go into them. But let's say you're even just trying to get to the stage of being able to create some work to assemble to then include in a grant submission. Some of the production grants can be really helpful to just even start at that production phase. And because I'm a media artist, these are maybe a bit more media arts focused, but Partners in Art is one example. That's a Toronto-based sort of granting body, and they this year had a call for, again, it was a production grant. So it wasn't necessarily like a huge amount of money per se to produce like a whole entire body of work, but it was still something that folks could apply to just start to get the creation of new work happening, let's say. So there's going to be 2 points here where we're going to talk about numbers, numbers and spreadsheets. So get ready, numbers and spreadsheets at an arts workshop. This is the reality. So the percentage that I've heard in some of the most recent workshops that I've sat in on is that success rates currently for at least Toronto Arts Council and Ontario Arts Council is sitting at about 12 to 16% currently. And when I first heard that number, I was a little bit like, oh. And essentially what it means is that the number of applicants, or at least this is what the grant officers, the grant administrators have said in some of these workshops, is that the number of people applying for grants has really skyrocketed in the last 5 years. So there's more people than ever before applying, but the amount of money that is available is stayed the same. And there hasn't been, as far as I understand, and I'm not affiliated with the granting bodies, but cuts necessarily to arts grants, but that's just, it's sort of a number, it's sort of a statistic that I think can put things into perspective in terms of how many projects are getting funded. And also within that, although they are not disclosing necessarily in the workshops exactly how much money folks are getting, you can go on to any of the granting bodies' websites and actually see, based on previous years, who the grant recipients have been, how much money they were granted and stuff, which, I mean, I will admit I've done it. I haven't done it on any cycles that I did not get a grant for. Have you done it
All the
before?
time, every single
Do
time.
you really? Okay.
I'm always like,
I mean, and that's like, I think it can be both disheartening, and I think it can be helpful to see just exactly what the sums of money are that are being granted to folks. Yeah, we'll go through the different opportunities first, and then we're going to come back to talk about some strategies. There used to sort of be this like anecdotal kind of success rate thing that lots of folks used to say, and I remember hearing this number and kind of believing this, that folks would say about like 10% of the grants that they applied for, they had success with. Or, people used to say like 1 in 3 was kind of like a success rate. But I personally don't think that numerically this is where we are at the present day. I think somewhere between 5 to 10% would be more realistic. So again, we'll talk more about numbers when we're talking about kind of strategies. Next is residencies. Has anybody here ever been to a residency? Gone to one? Yeah. So residencies there's examples locally, there's examples nationally across Canada, and then there's international ones. I'm going to sort of just quickly take a look at a few that are, I think, more accessible to folks because they are local, if not national. So residencies are sort of designed to be time and space to just focus on your work. And there's not really one set structure to them. So some can be much more creation focused, some can be much more collaborative, where really the expectation is that you are going and actually interacting with folks that are at the residency, that there's a really kind of social dynamic and social kind of element to it, and that that's actually part of it, that you're going to meet other artists and that you're going to get some feedback about your art. Some of them are much more solo, they're much more self-directed. And they really range from being funded in terms of like offering you funding to go, to being something that you pay for because you want to go. And there are some that I have personally on my radar that I'm really excited about hoping to be able to go to one day, but they're ones that they're not only sort of no funding for, but it's like I would pay to go doing it. So it sort of becomes like a trip to go somewhere where there is a community of artists and there is a sort of artistic culture that exists there, that I would also get to go and spend time there and to create work while I'm there. So to me, there is still value in doing that kind of thing, even though it would essentially cost me money, you know, in comparison to one where, let's say, there is funding to go. And so you're only going to go because it's going to get funded. So people will really prioritize different kinds of residencies for their own creative practice. I think sometimes even on like a year-by-year basis, in terms of thinking like this year, I really want to do this because I really need to just spend time creating work, or next year I want to try to apply for this one because I really want this opportunity XYZ and I want to meet folks in that particular community, that part of the world. I will say that in terms of getting funding to go to residencies, I think it's in a very tricky spot right now. The Ontario Arts Council has suspended their residency grant, so you can't even really apply to get funding for a residency through Ontario Arts Council. As far as I understand, if folks watching this recording know differently, it could change, but that's my understanding at the current time. And that through Canada Council, I also don't believe that in the emerging category, you could apply for residency funding, although I think once you are no longer considered an emerging artist, you can. But all this to say, we're going to look at a few that I think are maybe a bit more accessible to folks than something that is international. So locally, there's the Artscape 𝙍𝙬𝙟𝙚𝙟𝙗 residency on the Toronto Island. Has anybody ever been to like even see where this is, or has anybody heard of this before? It's magical. It's like so magical. Have you been?
I haven't, but I've always wanted to.
Magical. So I've only been for a 3-day residency at Artscape 𝙍𝙬𝙟𝙗𝙟𝙗𝙗, but it's so interesting because you're still in Toronto and you're there in like an hour and a half, basically, ferry travel time included. But it's a really, really exceptional space to just sort of work and create, and it is quite well known. Lots of people travel from other parts of Canada and come to specifically do this residency. So there's one that I found. I really tried to look up ones that are most kind of like current. And so this one is one that's specifically for students that are in master's or PhD programs. It's a research and creation thematic residency, but there's many others. They also run one which is for essentially artists who are mothers. It's called Mothra. And so it's a residency where children are welcome. And so practicing artists who have children are welcome to be there and to do this residency with their children there, because that is a community that sometimes doesn't get maybe the acknowledgement that it could and should. So I would really encourage folks to check that out. And I also know that for folks who are OCAD students, there is even an elective credit that you can do, which is one course that you actually get to do the residency as part of that elective credit. Obviously, that's only for OCAD students. Banff Center is another really great example. So this one is one that would be starting tomorrow. So the deadline obviously has passed. But this is a sort of early career artist in residence. Now, the thing with the Banff Center is that the Banff Center, although when you are looking at the website, I think it can be a bit misleading because it sort of looks like it's fully funded, and they use language on their website to say it's fully funded. And you can sort of, it can be unclear as to like, am I paying for this? Or like, what are the costs involved? So although I've never gone to Banff, it is on my radar. It's a place I would love to go and to do a residency. I know folks that have gone and had really amazing experiences there. There is still costs associated. I mean, there's the travel costs to get there. And then my understanding is that there's a meal plan that's mandatory. So Banff is very well known internationally across Canada. I think quite incredible, exceptional. I just would encourage that because of the way that it's appears, it can sort of seem as though it's like fully subsidized and that it's a paid residency, but there's still costs involved. This one is one that's sort of semi-local. So again, I was just sort of doing a bit of a quick look, but when we get to the set of links that I think folks can start to review regularly, you'll see many like this. So this is the Robert McLaughlin Gallery, which is in Kingston. And so they have a Oshawa. Yeah. So they have a call right now for emerging artists as well. And they do these calls regularly. So this is actually, I think, one for folks to have on their radar as something that is recurring. And that specifically, they really encourage folks who live in the Durham region to apply. So as you start to create your map of different opportunities, I think sometimes looking locally is a really great place to sort of get started with building your kind of network of opportunities, because many of them really prioritize local artists. Including in Hamilton, right? The residency, which I had included on the introductory slide that I did last year in Hamilton, they were really prioritizing Hamilton-based artists. And although I'm not Hamilton-based, I was still selected for that particular opportunity. So they see sometimes we'll have folks who are not from that local region, but oftentimes they really want to give opportunities to folks that are in those areas as well. So next is exhibitions, exhibition open calls, calls for submission, calls for proposals. Examples might include Xpace Gallery. And y'all do open calls twice a year or once a year?
We do one open call for submission during the spring, in which we program the entire programming year through that. That includes soliciting proposals for curatorial projects from guest curators, and sometimes guest curators have their own thematic that they also want to put out smaller thematic calls for submissions for. So it could be anywhere between like one big open call a year to one big open call, and then like upwards of like 3 smaller calls for submissions throughout the year too. So it's variable.
Yeah, and so I think galleries, and in particular artist-run centers, are sort of like the most critical kind of entry points. Because really, especially when there's that many opportunities that are coming up and there's that many different ways to sort of get your artwork and get what it is that you do onto the radar of folks, the better. So I think Xpace is a really fantastic example. Just because I wanted to pull up another one, and this is actually one that I'm planning to apply to with a couple of other folks. So this is Modern Fuel Artist-Run Center, and they are based in, maybe that's who I was thinking, Kingston. I think these folks are in Kingston. So they have an open call right now. It's a call for submissions. So, you know, all of these really do start to become just a part of your year after year kind of process in terms of the applications that people are starting to put up there. I'm going to also cover fellowships quickly, although fellowships are maybe less pertinent to some folks because they tend to be maybe more for folks that are graduated at kind of a master's level. They also tend to be affiliated with an institution like a university, gallery, or museum. The bar is kind of higher for these ones, and they tend to be much longer term. So sometimes up to like 12 months or longer. This is an interesting one locally, the Image Center at TMU, but they accept research fellow applicants, I think, from anybody. You don't necessarily have to be a TMU student or TMU graduate. And this is specifically to do research in their photo archive and to sort of propose a photo sort of research-based initiative. The Delphina Foundation is an incredible one. They are based in London, and this one is specifically to do work within the Tate Modern. And I mean, it sounds incredibly prestigious and exciting, and it's something I would definitely love to apply to one day. But this particular one, the deadline just recently passed, and I just like was not organized in that place to get an application for it. The thing I'll say about fellowships is that fellowships, although I mentioned that the bar is kind of higher, the timelines are longer. From a sort of remuneration standpoint, they're still not necessarily going to be providing you with like a salary. Often they're really just giving you a sort of subsistence amount of money. So, especially with the 𝙍𝙬𝙟𝙗𝙗 Foundation and to be living in London for 12 months, you would be living pretty lean, but these are seen as opportunities, right? They're seen as opportunities to build your CV, build your resume. But they can be tricky, right? Because for some folks, even the costs that would be associated with getting yourself to and from, sure, once you're there, you're going to be having a sort of subsistence budget, but there can be still time that it takes to get yourself ready to even apply to these kinds of things. So I'm going to sort of conclude this portion, which is looking just at the different kinds of applications with encouraging folks to know and think about and sort of reflect on the fact that an artistic life and an artistic career it's really sort of lifelong. And so in the different kinds of opportunities that we just talked about, there's many different ways that you might think about them. So grants are the most immediate and sometimes the most appealing to people because it's money. Like it's just seen as like money to make the thing, to do the thing. So grants are often where people put a lot of their time and energy into. And things like residencies, or something like a fellowship is maybe for some people less high of a priority than like a grant, let's say. But I want to encourage people to think about just the different kinds of opportunities that exist. And then thinking sort of year after year, and even looking to the next year ahead, or imagining maybe, this year I'm going to really focus on this part of my creative practice. And then the year after that, I'm going to really put in some grant applications because I know that I'm going to have an idea that I'm really going to be ready to sort of try to drive forward. And that I'm going to need some grant funding to do it. So again, there's a whole range there. I didn't want to focus only on grants. So all this to say, you've put out all your applications, you're so ready. Oh, we're going to talk about meetings as well. So the networking component of it. So the networking component of it, which I mentioned before, I think of this as really sort of like an organic kind of opportunity. It's something that can't be necessarily, it's not as formal or as rigid in the way that the applications and those introductions are happening. But I think of this as just as important in terms of getting people to sort of know and understand who you are and what it is you do. So, my encouragement to folks would be, and we can get into this, I think, when you and I are talking, but is to just also understand that there should be sort of outreach happening alongside these formal applications. And sometimes that might look like sending something in the mail, let's say to a gallery or curator or to a writer. So you're not going to be able to like mail something to a writer, you might be sending them an email, but to just also be thinking about that sort of, networking, networking that isn't just purely for the sake of trying to sort of get something, but really trying to sort of like introduce people to your work and to sort of start to get some of these conversations happening. All this to say, this is another component of it, which here's where I was getting ready to get to. You've sent out your grants, you've sent out your applications, you've applied for your fellowships. That's so you've sent out some emails to a couple writers, you've sent something out to galleries. Crickets, rejections, denials. Now the granting bodies like to use the language of unsuccessful. So they will never say that a grant failed. They don't really use the word failure. They really try to sort of couch it in this way to say like, oh, that grant wasn't successful. So I will say that I want to like sort of start by really encouraging folks to understand that there's like an emotional component to it that will happen. And especially when you are invested in your work And especially if your work is about something that is sort of core to your identity, which in contemporary art, so much of the art that we're making and so much of the work that we're doing, right? Everybody's sort of like looking internally and reflecting internally. And for myself, there was, the year before last, when I was applying for just really aggressively for grants and stuff, a lot of the calls were calling specifically for folks of a specific population. And so they really wanted applicants who are part of this minority community. And almost none of them were offering any feedback. So part of these applications is that you will see they do not offer feedback. Many of them will say explicitly, unfortunately, we cannot offer feedback. So when you have put your time, your energy, all your motivation, all your inspiration, you put it out there to the world, there is a really sort of emotional and visceral reaction that I think can kind of happen, which might include wanting to take your painting and throw it off the balcony and shatter it. I do truly say it because I think that it's actually valid to sort of acknowledge that those kinds of things can happen. Those feelings can come up for people. And there's lots of stories of famous artists as well who have destroyed a painting after having some bad meeting or having a gallerist drop them and stuff. It's very real. Those emotions are very real. So let's talk solutions. So for folks who are just coming out of an arts program, this workshop is for emerging artists. So folks who are here, it's likely because you consider yourself to be still kind of emerging. I have a newsflash, which is that being an artist is a never-ending series of group projects. It is a never-ending one after the other series of group collaborations. So the first solution piece I want to offer to people is to understand that community is so key. Community is so critical. I almost can't really overstate it. And so when it comes to those rejections, I think reaching out to the folks that are in your creative community and the folks that you're close with, I want to encourage people to do that because actually, again, those emotions are really real. They're very valid. And so I sort of want to propose that it's one of the only ways to really engage a lifelong creative and artistic practice is to do that by really cultivating a community of creative collaborators. And within that is this sort of key act of reciprocity. So reciprocity is giving and taking, right? So in that creative community and in that sort of culture of collaboration, I think what folks will come to experience as they start to apply to some of these things is that almost always you are being asked for some form of support. That can be support letters and grants. With fellowships, it's often letters of recommendation or having references. So you will kind of, I think, especially in the beginning, find yourself needing to ask for other people to provide something or to do something, or if you're writing a grant, I mean, it's just almost impossible that you would only ever be writing a grant as like one person writing a grant in complete and total sort of silo. You really, if nothing else, I would encourage folks who are just starting out and are maybe going to apply for the first handful of grants, is to think about having somebody else that would even just proofread it for them. So you might not necessarily be building somebody into your grant, but you're just getting somebody else to take a look at it, you're getting somebody else to read it over. And because a lot of the grants, specifically, they really want the language to be sort of accessible. They don't want it to feel overly, academic. So that can be a really helpful way to get somebody else's eyes on it and sort of get that perspective of does this project make sense to them? Do they understand this as a person who maybe they know what you do artistically, maybe they don't. When they read it, do they understand? Okay, I get what it is you want to do. And then in that, you also may eventually be asked to offer that for other people. So you might be asked to write letters of support for them. You might be offered or, asked to be part of a grant that they're going to be applying for. Essentially art is collaborative by nature. I think that that's just a really sort of key part of it. The next sort of encouragement nudge that I have for folks is that rejection really is part of a growing process. So although it can legitimately feel like you want to go and, throw your artwork off of a balcony, trust me, I have been there. I just also think that it's so necessary. I sort of go back to that, if you're not getting rejected, you're not trying hard enough. It's like you actually have to just keep seeing it as a sort of growth opportunity, and that it's part of the growth process. So in that, I'm also going to say that there's more resources out there now than ever before, I think, to keep sort of seeing what other opportunities exist. So this link I'm going to share with folks, so I do not want everybody to try to write it down because there's a lot on here, but we're going to go through a few of them. And so I think in terms of kind of starting to follow the different kinds of opportunities that are out there. Some of these are Substack, some of these are Instagram, some of them are websites. I just can honestly say that, for myself, knowing that there are these cycles to grants and that there are, annual opportunities that come, and some of them, they don't happen every single year. So there's one, residency that I saw a few years ago, and I just wasn't quite in a position to apply for it. I would have loved to, I didn't, and I have checked every single year since then, and I have never offered it again. So it's not to say that there's always this sense of, oh, if it didn't happen this year, I'll just get it next year. Some things don't necessarily come back around, but all this to say, like, look at this list. This is like an amazing list of all these different resources, and each one of these is posting a ton of different calls for submissions, exhibition open calls. Like, there's so much information out there. So, when I heard that statistic of the 12 to 16% success rate, and you just sort of think, oh my goodness, it's like the chances are so slim of like getting a grant, let's say, because so many people are applying and so much more information is out there for people to apply to these things. There's also so many other things to keep applying to, and so many other things to keep sort of researching. And that's where, really just keeping a sort of like open mind and a really broad perspective is really necessary. So this is one which I know Xpace reposts from, and they're phenomenal. They are primarily Canadian opportunities. And I think what I like about this one is that they really range from some that are smaller to some that are bigger. They also include job opportunities as well. And they're very active. The pilot art list is one that I tried for the first time this year, and it is a paid one. It's one that somebody sort of self-organizes. It's like one person that puts it together, and they structure it with, I think twice or three times a year, they do like a much bigger, longer list. And then every single month they also share. Now this one is paid, so there's no free option with it at all. But I think it's $7 for the mega lists, they call them, and then the monthly one is maybe like $3 or $4 or something. And it's like a newsletter. It comes to your inbox. Again, nice because I think it's a lot of Canadian ones, but also some international ones as well. Fractured Atlas I really like, but Fractured Atlas is mostly American. Some international sprinkled in. Now going back to the residencies piece, I'll just sort of say this like anecdotally. The thing about doing a residency in America is that it can be tricky and it can be complicated in terms of crossing the border, declaring that you're going to attend a residency, because it may have some questions about, are you being compensated? Technically, you shouldn't be being compensated if you're going to the States and you don't have a visa. America obviously is in a very complicated place right now, but I still share this one because I do think that it's like active, and there's a nice sort of range of different opportunities that are out there, and is one that I think folks should know about. So one of the other tools that I'm going to share with folks is the spreadsheet, the grant management spreadsheet. which is here. So this is the tool that I use, and I'm going to be sharing this link with folks so that you can download this, save it, use it yourself however you want, build it out. Essentially what I do is track the grants that I'm applying for, which granting body, all this kind of information. And one of the really important parts is the notification timeframe. So admittedly, because if sort of one season to the next, you're trying to plan out projects and you're trying to imagine when you're going to be able to get things started. I pay attention to when I'm going to be getting notified, because also I think it's okay to emotionally be preparing yourself for either something amazing happening in the next 6 months to a year, or still really feeling stuck with a project that you're trying to get in motion. So that's it's a key part in there, but hopefully this is a tool that's helpful to people, and I track what I'm applying to on a quarter by quarter basis, year after year. And if there's a little bit of time left at the end, I'm happy to show folks what my 2024 looked like. And so in that, one of the last little pieces that I'm going to kind of share about, that's a more sort of tactile thing, I guess, or a more concrete thing, is around timeframes. So I was on an OAC, Ontario Arts Council workshop recently, and they talked about giving yourself a 4-week deadline in advance of the actual grant, to sort of mentally try to prepare yourself for that 4 weeks prior point, as opposed to leaving it right to the very, very end. Because one of the other things about writing really solid applications is that if it's happening within a couple days of the deadline, it's not likely to be as good as it could be. And so even with sort of mitigating potential for rejection, giving yourself that time to really put in the work can actually sort of benefit you, I think, in that way. Which is why, like I said, when I decided not to end up, submitting a grant, even though I had done a ton of work on it, it's just because I knew I just didn't feel like it was in a place to submit. Which isn't to say we are not also still sometimes there the night before the grant deadline, seriously writing.
Oh yeah, life can be so busy, I mean, all of us have to like work jobs in addition to like making art, so it's like we can't always dedicate the proper time it takes. And so that's just, it's this process of like intuition, right, of just like doing your best, like thinking about future you, but also like being like, okay, well, there's only so many hours in a day, so you do always find yourself sometimes applying last minute. It happens.
Yeah. I like that 4-week deadline, because it was sort of like, if you imagine that the deadline is 4 weeks in advance, and then when that 4-week deadline comes, you're really trying to like work for that. So that even from the 4-week deadline to the actual deadline, you're more so finessing, as opposed to like trying to create it in a week, which like I've also done. And the grant was not successful, so go figure. Yeah, and I'm just going to encourage folks, lean on your support system. And even if it's not necessarily a sort of collaborative creative community yet, if you're still just kind of like getting into some of these networks and starting to make connections with other artists, that might just even be like your friends who are not artists, or friends who don't even understand the art system and think that this all sounds kind of bananas. I really encourage connecting with grant administrators. If folks haven't done it before, the grant administrators are really there to like answer questions to people. And although like Ontario Arts Council, they will actually offer a 20-minute, 15 to 20-minute feedback call after you've applied to a grant. They're, I think, one of the only ones that does. TAC does not, but TAC is really, really open and receptive to meeting with people in advance of grant deadlines. So they really want to sort of give you that feedback up front so that you have a chance to still do some work on it, as opposed to submitting it, not getting it, and then feeling a sense of, rejection or failure, right? They also want to avoid that for people. I include on here too, again, this idea of micro grants. So the exhibition assistance recommender grants through OAC are a really great one. And they they're sort of in the ballpark of like, I think between like 1,500 to 2,000 is the amounts that you can ask for. And again, like a sort of, I would think of them as kind of like a nice entryway grant as you're kind of getting started. We covered this. And so the last thing I'll say before we open up to some questions is not taking rejection personally. I think it's a skill that takes time to develop. Because when you're, again, putting so much into the work that you're doing, instinctively, it can feel like, well, clearly this is something that I'm doing wrong, or clearly this is about the kind of work that I'm making, or that this isn't what juries are interested in right now, or that this isn't what's trendy right now, like that kind of stuff. When you think back to those numbers, right, that on average right now, sort of 15% of projects are getting funded. So one of the TAC grants that I applied for last year, they had over 200 applicants. So when over 200 people have applied for a grant and they can only fund about 15% of the projects, that means that 30 projects are getting funded. So it really is not necessarily just about like my work is not the right thing, or this project is not the right thing. Like it can sometimes just come down to like they can only fund so many projects, and that even for them it can be really tough, a tough feeling. And I'm sure you've experienced, you know, even when it comes to open calls, that there's many amazing projects.
Yeah, I think in my time at Xpace, I think one of the most sort of tragic things about it is just realizing that while Xpace does so much and offers so many different sorts of opportunities and exhibitions to emerging artists, can't show everyone that we're interested in working with. And our open call gets upwards of like 100 to 200 submissions, and we can really only like program like, I mean, before COVID, we were doing like 24 shows a year, which was just so much, to only doing around like 12 to 16. And that's still more than other spaces of our size too. Like other galleries in the area are only doing like 3 to 4 shows a year. So even then, it's like we're still doing a lot. I think, yeah, you just met with this sort of imbalance of sorts, and everything that we do at Xpace tries to meet that. And so I'll also say, while I'm here, while I've got the floor, unlike quite a few spaces in the city, with Xpace's open call, we offer feedback at any point in the process. We know that like feedback commonly doesn't happen. And so we're totally open to talking through ideas before the open call deadline. I can like talk through ideas, or I can also just get into a Google Doc and help you copyright. So it can be really as in-depth as you need. Additionally, you know, stemming from this realization that, you know, so many folks don't get this, even though like there's so many projects we're excited about, we're always offering feedback about applications post submission results. And again, it's, if you just tell me the sort of feedback you're looking for the degree you want it, like I can just give a few general comments, or I can give you paragraphs. So yeah, we're trying to like meet and encounter these things. But we are an outlier. Like we don't have, like, we're one of the few spaces that like offer this much in-depth feedback. And so it's tricky for sure.
And so I'm ending with what I hope is an encouragement to people to keep creating, and to understand that there are so many channels, and that there are sometimes alternative forms that a work can take on. So I wanted to think about the term scalability, and scalability is really helpful even when you're applying for grants, because they will actually consider, you know, if a project is really specific and it like can only be done on like this size and this scale, and it has to be this big, and like if you're someone who you are only thinking, you know, huge, massive, like you just only big or nothing, you know, there will be limitations in that. So I think knowing that even if your project is like a series of pencil illustrations, and that is enough for that particular project to continue to stay alive and to be something that you're working on and that you're continuing with, you could imagine it as a graphic novel that's published in multiple languages and is 250 pages and is available around the world. And like that could be an eventuality, yes, but maybe for a couple of years, it's a series of pencil illustrations and some text to go along with it. Like that scalability, I think just really helps to, I just think it helps to allow that work to still kind of like live, and internally as well. So that's kind of the piece that I want to leave it with. Oh, actually one more, which is to say that breaks are really critical. We were talking a little bit before about just like giving yourself time to actually fully rest, and especially after, let's say, like a cycle of really intense grant application, or like a year of really feeling like this is my year, I'm gonna just like do it all. Like I applied for just like really too many things last year, to just this year be like, I can't really keep that up. Like it's just actually not even sort of physically humanly possible to do that much writing, to like write that many grants, and to not just sometimes be like, I can't do that much. That's really healthy and I think necessary to give ourselves that. Oh, and then the compare despair. Do we all know this? So I brought this one into the mix, as I think this is the last slide. Hopefully, yeah, this is the last slide, because social media has really, I think, kind of created this really sort of interesting echo chamber where we're seeing the highlight reel. And although we all know this probably, right, or we've all heard this, like just how sort of harmful social media can be in terms of feeling bad about yourself when you see what other people are doing or what other people have, to just know that there is almost this direct kind of link to like looking and comparing to what it is that you see other people having that you feel you yourself don't have is like a surefire way to feel not good about what you actually do have and can be working on, and what you are actually yourself creating. So sometimes in with that breaks piece, I would say to give yourself that break from like even looking at social media or looking at other people's websites, or looking at all the other stuff that people are up to. Okay, we're going to conclude our recording and then we're going to have some informal Q&As here. So first of all, we'll say thanks for